Hello. So as Paz said, my name is Darrel Farris. I am a partner and U.S. country manager for Abstracta. But today I'm here representing Mabel, my former employer, and also an Abstracta partner. I've worked in tech for a really long time. Notice the lack of hair up here. But I've done all sorts of roles. Similar to Charlie, I started off doing something completely different than I do today. I started in tech support and being a system administrator at an internet provider. So I got to do both really nerdy server things, but also interacting with users a lot, and oftentimes frustrated users. Fun fact, a little bit about me. I'm a crafter. I make things. And I also fix, repair, and restore pianos in my spare time because pianos are really complex instruments and with thousands and thousands of parts. So if you're ever looking for a hobby to take your OCD to the next level, explore piano technician. In today's talk, and I want to keep this pretty rapid, we're going to talk a little bit about testing transformation, kind of set a foundation, and then we're going to talk about why things go wrong, as they sometimes do, and then talk about some things that we can do to make it better and hopefully have better outcomes. So what is testing transformation? I think testing transformations are any initiative that helps us revamp, revitalize, make things better. And there are different reasons why we might want to do that, right? We might need to modernize our testing efforts. Maybe we have a lot of legacy processes. There's lots of things happening, lots of innovation right now, right? And so maybe we want to start bringing some of those new things into our teams. We might realize that we're operating inefficiently. We could be doing things better. And eventually someone decides, let's try. It's a good thing. We may also realize that our product is not meeting our users' expectations, right? Whether that's through quality, whether that's through performance, increasingly security. And we also just need to keep pace with DevOps, right? Lots of things are happening and have happened in software development, and sometimes testing hasn't really kept up. And some of that's through tooling, some of that's through people, some of that's through just our approach and regard for quality. And I'm sure everyone in this room today holds quality in a very high regard. So starting off with a basic foundation for everything I'm presenting here, at a technical level, I think DevOps is a requirement. For many of us in modern software companies, this may seem redundant. We're like, well, yeah, of course we're using DevOps. I'm here to tell you, I speak with tons of people around the world about software all the time. Some people are just getting started automating their build and release processes in 2023. And they need help. Why do we want to do this? Because it gives us the ability to act faster with greater frequency so we can deliver value in shorter spans of time to our users. That also helps us as developers and testers because we can work in smaller chunks of work, right? And more encapsulated. It gives us better quality and reliability because we have a consistent, repeatable, iterative process. It saves us money as well, and that's probably self-explanatory. On the softer side of things, DevOps also gives us a place to collaborate, right? Ops teams and developers used to be often on different sides of the building in an office. And now everyone has visibility because in a DevOps culture, we also have observability. So when something goes wrong, more people are aware and they can act faster without waiting to be told. It's efficient. And it improves our customer experience, right? In the old days, when we had really bad quality in software, users feared updates. And I remember working for one company where we decided that we were going to release quarterly, 4 times a year. And our users were terrified because every time a release came out, something broke. nowadays, right, I can refresh my iPhone right now. I probably have 60 updates waiting for different applications on my phone. DevOps lets us reduce our downtime as well. The worst thing that could possibly happen is when a user wants to use your application and they just can't. And it looks really bad when it's down rather than just slightly broken. And much like Charlie was just talking about, DevOps is an enabler for continuous learning and continuous improvement. And that's really the crux of my talk today. So what are the benefits here? If it helps interpreting this slide, the pink bullets are things that we can do as software builders and creators. And the purple dots are the impacts that a user might feel because of those actions. So when we ship regular feature updates and we're improving our software, users feel that they're using a product that's alive and dynamic and current and constantly being improved for their benefit, right? Feels good for us. No one wants to use a product that's just becoming stagnant. That's when we start looking for other solutions. High quality software, right? Many of us have embraced test automation. It's a good thing. That lets us find problems earlier, hopefully before our users do, sometimes not. But users experience less frustration. These are incremental successes. As we get better, the impact grows. This isn't something we just do and everything is magically better all of a sudden. It's a process. Improved performance, when we are monitoring and using those observability tools, like Charlie was just talking about, our users feel that the application is more responsive, right? It's more performant. It feels higher quality because it's working good to their expectations. And then innovation and experimentation. When we create space for innovation in our teams and we build rituals around that, our users benefit from that too, because as we learn new things and we enhance our knowledge and translate that into our products and our interactions with users as well as people, they feel like they're having a fresh and engaging experience, right? User satisfaction comes from lots of different places, and it's not just from bug-free software. So thinking a little bit about what is a testing transformation look like, even though I have 5 little stages here, not one size fits all, and often not linear. So let's dive through these with a little bit more detail. So in the beginning, oftentimes we don't start with a lot of automation, especially if you're a startup, right, and you're bootstrapping. A pipeline might not be the first thing you create. You might do a lot of things manually, especially testing. Your tools probably aren't as mature as the organization that's been around for 15 or 20 years, right? We start small oftentimes, and then we look for opportunities and reasons to grow in certain areas. In terms of tools that we use, right? How many people are still doing lots of things in spreadsheets? I know I am. As we kind of move on, right, we decide, hey, maybe it's time to bring some automation in here, not just testing, but DevOps. Automated pipelines, building and releasing and hopefully deploying our software. That lets us start embracing iteration as a mode of operation in our teams. And it also gives us the ability to start experimenting a little more, right? Because we've added some efficiency that creates some space. And with that space, we can choose to use it in any way that we think might benefit our teams, our users, our company at large. This is also where we might start, experimenting with, hey, let's stop doing just manual testing on the web page. Let's add a little bit of automation, and oftentimes we all know what the testing pyramid is, right? Where unit testing is at the bottom and the second big section is API testing, and the little tippy top is just UI automation. I've seen so many teams where it's reversed and everyone starts automating the UI and you get this giant suite of UI tests that is impossible to maintain. That doesn't feel good. And then we might let, who knows if the developers are doing unit testing. We have to start building those bridges too, and that often happens in this stage. And then once you start getting everyone aligned a bit more, you can start scaling, right? And start doing more. So we might start looking at other modalities in testing. Maybe we've done a good job with the UI, API, hopefully the unit layer. So this is where we might start looking at performance testing, accessibility testing. These are important things too, right? We might start looking at, hey, can we start experimenting with continuous deployment? Not just building our software, but actually releasing it somewhere. That could be our internal environments, which is hopefully where we start. And then eventually, right? And not many people do this because it's very scary, but some companies, right? A developer does a pull request, a bunch of tests pass. Next thing you know, a user is looking at that feature. That's one of the big goals of DevOps, but if you're not doing that, don't worry, not many people are, because there's so much risk with it, and you have to have so much more of a foundation for that to be de-risked. So thinking about tools and techniques here, right, this is when we start noticing that, maybe the things that we want to do, our team doesn't quite have the capability to do that. And we might start thinking about hiring new roles. We might start thinking about doing tutorials in the evenings so we can learn new things. I know that's how I spent a lot of years in my career. And thankfully, we have a lot of information and knowledge available now to make that more possible independently. But it really works better when you do it in a community or with your team. We might start using things like feature flags at this point. We might start developing deployed feature branches so we can test things in isolation. And we also might start embracing observability. So all of these things that we're doing, we can start seeing the impacts, positive and negative. And if we get really good at this, then we might start saying, hey, we've sort of crossed a lot of barriers here to start doing things better. And there's this new phrase called quality engineering. It's actively being defined every day. To me, quality engineering is more of a state of being. We've been doing all of these things, and so we've arrived somewhere. It's cultural to me. So this is where, we might start thinking less about tools and more about the holistic experience of developing software in our organizations. And not just for us as developers, but also the impacts of our users too. We might start thinking of, doing some of that wild, crazy, esoteric types of testing and things like chaos testing, right? What happens when we unplug this thing? What does that look like? What are the impacts of that? What kind of things does it break, if anything? This is also where I think if you do have skills gaps or knowledge gaps in the team, right, this is where it becomes a really big problem. And we have to start doing things to address those. But this is where we might start thinking about, all right, we've got the test automation, all the basic stuff is happening. What about all this new AI stuff? Maybe there are ways that we can start incorporating that into our workflows in sensible ways. We might also start, being more rigorous around service virtualization, containerization, being able to spin up environments just like that so we can do various things, right? It's more fluid, I think, is one of the qualities that comes in this phase. All that is fine. And this is when I say this is not a linear process. When you start embracing a continuous learning or continuous improvement culture, you start getting in front of those skills gaps and problems that you're identifying. You start being able to predict the future a little bit. You're paying attention to industry trends. You're paying attention to what your competitors are doing. And you also might, like we are all doing today, participating in conferences, whether as an attendee or a speaker, because you're trying to gain more knowledge so you can solve problems in better ways. And I think the external contribution piece is so important because it gives you the opportunity to learn from other people who are also practicing similar disciplines and crafts that you might be. So this is where, if we're thinking of tools and techniques, does anyone not know what a community of practice is? I know this is an English term. A community of practice is a group of people. Imagine a group of testers, right, in a large organization. You might have, or developers, could be anything. But you might have disparate teams across a company that don't really work together, but you can still bring them together to share experiences, share knowledge that they've learned within their little piece of the puzzle. And it's so important because we all learn things in different ways, in different paces, and based on different stimuli that we might experience in the day. So carrying that out and teaching others is how we can help each other develop and become better at what we do. This is where we also might start thinking about experimentation in a structured way, not just, hey, I'm going to try this thing. It's no, let's come up with a hypothesis. Let's see if we can play that out, and then let's evaluate the results. And then let's determine whether that was a good experiment, whether maybe we learned something about the approach, and then can we do it again, maybe in a different way? Is there some way to arrive at that outcome? And the outcome is really what we're, aligned towards, but the way that we get there has so many variables. And that's what the joy of experimentation really is discerning which of those variables is the most impactful. All good so far? Thumbs up? All right. So now let's get a little darker. So all that sounds great, but sometimes things don't always go right. And why? So a big thing here, and many of these things are not technical. Many things in life that go wrong aren't really technical, right? It's the circumstances. If anyone's tried to effect change in an organization, it's very hard, right? Who thinks change is hard? Who likes change? Any hands? Any hands? Oh, yeah. I moved into a new house recently. I love the house. It's great. I hated moving. I don't ever want to move again. I know I will. I'm afraid. But consider, right? Your existing processes, right? They're seldom perfect. Very few things in life are perfect. But we need to make time to improve those. And a lot of that time is spent learning and taking in information that we might not already know. If we already knew everything, we'd be doing everything perfectly. Maybe. Humans have a way of screwing things up sometimes. But having said that, right, humans are naturally wired to prefer stability because change is scary. However, we typically, maybe if it's good change, we like the outcomes, but there's also a natural fear of failure, right? And oftentimes it's not the change we're afraid of it going wrong. So what can we do about that? If we embrace a culture and create a culture of continuous learning and experimentation, it becomes safer because we're institutionalizing the process of experimentation, right? We're going to try something new for the first time. When you do that alone, people might be wondering like, oh my God, what's this guy doing? When you do it as a team and in a structured way, all of a sudden everyone's wanting to contribute to that, right? I have an idea. Well, what if we did it this way? What if we, tried this? That's when it's fun. Change can be fun. When we offer training, and there's so many, training is a big word. We have the internet now. Yay! And there's so much information and ability to learn new things, whether technical or not. I learned to knit from some videos on YouTube. Because, yeah, we'll go into that later. But it gives us the ability to, I think, figure out where the gaps are in our own knowledge or our team's knowledge if we're managing a group of people, and giving us ways to build bridges across that. So naturally, that means that we have to be aware of what our shortcomings are. That part's hard too. But if you're talking about those things, and that typically happens in a culture of experimentation, it becomes easier. Another problem is not having alignment on the expectations of whatever we're doing. And this is where things go wrong, right? Unrealistic goals can lead to rushed work. I might say, hey, Mercedes, I want to, start building some performance tests in our pipeline. You're like, okay, great, go for it, right? We didn't talk about any details. So Mercedes might have a completely different idea in her head of what the outcome is going to be than I do. And that's a problem. Because when I get to a point of saying, all right, I did the thing and it's good, Mercedes looks at it and it's like, no, it's not. And then we all wonder, well, what went wrong? So there is a human tendency to be overly optimistic about outcomes sometimes, right? We see, there's a French song called La Vie en Rose, right? We think about rose-colored glasses. Everything is a little pink and soft if we put those glasses on. In sales teams, we call them happy ears because, you hear what you want to hear and it's always good. So what can we do with that as managers? We have to make sure that we're setting clear, realistic goals. And sometimes clear, realistic goals are less exciting than the big, lofty ones. But that is often a test, right? Because when something is very big and very grand, it's exciting, but it's also a little fuzzy on how we're going to get there. When something is clear and realistic, usually the path to achieving that is a little more straightforward and contained. We want to make sure to set milestones in these sorts of initiatives so we know where we're going. And when we finally get there, we need to make sure to celebrate those wins. There's nothing worse than being in a culture of when you as an individual contributor succeed at something and the leadership around you just says, okay, great, here's the next thing, go. And you're like, oh, where's the party? We just did something good. Adding some fun in your work culture is a really good thing for lots of reasons, especially employee retention managers. We need to make sure that we're educating any stakeholders or any people participating in these efforts. What are we going to do? And make sure that they understand that this isn't going to be a 1 week and we just got to the positive outcome. Awesome. No, these things are incremental, especially because they're cultural in many ways. And culture takes time to build and nurture and sustain. Another problem, and I see this especially nowadays, we kind of look to tooling to solve all of our problems, and we end up with this giant body of technical stuff in our work, and sometimes it isn't actually helping us. So in English, there's a phrase, shiny ball syndrome, and that's when you're looking at something and then you see another shiny ball and you're just, woo, and you just go towards that, right? That's what we don't want to do. It's fun to experiment. It's fun to play with new tools, but we need to be very mindful of bringing those into a structured, reliable, quality-driven workflow. So We also have to make sure that when we do bring on new tools, we're very aware of what the impacts are on our workflows. I love throwing a little GPT in, every now and again in certain things. I'm still learning how it's impacting my workflows. But this is also where, fear of making the wrong choices about our tooling can also lead to some analysis paralysis. I remember working with a team that was trying to figure out, it's just so simple, right? Where do we want to store our code? Do we want it in GitHub? Do we want it in Bitbucket? Do we want it in, all of these different source control management tools? 3 months later, right, they still haven't decided where they want to keep the code. Wow. All right, team composition and skills gaps. Learning new things takes time, right? We all agree on that. So what do we need to do? We need to encourage and set up the structure for our teams to learn new things. And if we don't do that, we're setting everyone up for a disadvantage. I really like this quote because I think it's just very realistic. Is a friend of mine, Janet. She manages quality at a company called Flickr, a photo sharing site. The road to all of this is really, really bumpy. So buckle up and get ready for the ride. Be kind to each other and do it. We are going to skip this section entirely, but it's about leveling up our team. So I'll speed through it real quick, but mainly just stay on here. So much like before, when we're trying to impart change in our organizations, we want to make sure that we have clear objectives. We also want to make sure that we're nurturing a continuous learning culture, because when you do that and it's just part of everyone's day-to-day, it makes everything so much easier. When you just have a spike every now and then in some sort of behavioral shift, it can be jarring. It can also make people wonder what's going on, right? It can inspire fear instead of excitement. When we're trying to build a culture of continuous learning, the learning part is great, but we also need to make sure that we're setting up opportunities to actually practice these things hands-on, right? And creating opportunities for that. And managers, you need to be doing this along with your teams as well. You can't expect everyone who works under you to be learning something new if you're not. If we do these things, we want to make sure that we're also evaluating our progress and success. So talk amongst yourselves, how are we doing? Should we continue this? Start, stop, continue kind of thing. We need to monitor our outcomes and make sure that we're arriving at the correct outcomes that we set before, right? Because we have clear objectives at this point. Not a huge fan, but I think it's a great quote. But yes, the best way to motivate your teams is to create a real culture of learning, right? When you do that and you encourage people to take on new challenges and to never stop learning, that's what keeps us engaged. I know a lot of us, with an engineering mindset, right? We like learning, we like problem solving. We also like new ways to solve familiar problems as well, right? And that's why we're all so excited about every new technological innovation that comes our way that can make our lives and our jobs easier or better in some way. So key takeaways, as I mentioned, I think on the first slide, any kind of transformation, whether we're talking about testing, digital, DevOps, the many transformations and journeys that we're all taking these days, it's not one size fits all. It has to be tailored to your unique context, your current state of capability and maturity. And that's sometimes a very difficult thing to be honest about, but really important conversations to have to make sure you're setting yourself and your teams up for success. This is just as much about people and culture as it is about tools and process. You need all of the things to work together. Just bringing some new tool in isn't going to do anything for you. Communication is key to everything in life, I think is pretty much how it works. But really, communication is the key that unlocks so many doors. So anytime you're going through any sort of process that is instituting some kind of change in your organization, Everyone needs to be on the same page. Everyone needs to be aligned. You have to make space for critique, and you have to create space for celebration as well, because this stuff's hard. A learning culture is an innovative culture. So when you make investments in learning and in new tooling to enable new capabilities, you're empowering your teams. So think about, how can we empower our teams to take on new challenges and to drive better outcomes for ourselves as a company, but especially for our users? And making sure that we have a shared vision, open communication, we're supporting innovation and learning, right? That's the chief goal. And that's how we really get to all of these good outcomes that we're talking about. It's holistic. And I rushed through that. Good job, Paz. Awesome. So as I mentioned, I do work for Abstracta now, but I am representing Mabel here today. If you don't know, Mabel is a low-code automation platform. Abstracta is a Mabel partner. Happy to talk to you more about that, show you a demo, whatever. But find me on LinkedIn. I would love to hear your impressions. I want to hear your feedback, because that's part of my continuous learning and development process as well. So thank you very much again. Enjoy the rest of the conference.